As we get closer to Election Day, the Supreme Court, they're weighing in on more and more election-related cases. Justices just ruled in two separate cases that Pennsylvania and North Carolina can count ballots after Election Day if they are postmarked by November 3rd. Now, those rulings are considered victories for Democrats, as mail-in ballots tend to be heavily Democratic. And speaking of the all-important Pennsylvania, election officials and Democrats, they were also saying the president is trying to suppress the vote there and, in the process, intimidate voters as well. Trump's campaign has already sent people to monitor and to videotape early voting sites and drop boxes, and the president's rhetoric is also certainly a cause for concern.
The governor counts the ballots, and we're watching you, Governor, very closely in Philadelphia. We're watching you. A lot of bad things happen there with the counting of the votes. We're watching you, Governor Wolf, very closely. We're watching you.
You can watch all he wants. The governor doesn't actually count the votes, but again, why let facts get in the way of that? Now, the Supreme Court also ruled in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. They come just days after the High Court declined, though, to allow Wisconsin, obviously a pivotal swing state, to count ballots postmarked before but received after Election Day. Democrats and voting rights groups, they're incensed by the majority decision written by Justice Brett Kavanaugh. In it, he spelled out why states should decide the results by midnight on November 3rd. I'm going to quote from him directly here. Those states want to avoid the chaos and suspicions of impropriety that can ensue if thousands of absentee ballots flow in after Election Day and potentially flip the results of an election. And those states also want to be able to definitively announce the results of the election on election night or as soon as possible thereafter. I want to bring in our guest to discuss this. Professor Paul Gronke, he teaches political science at Reed College. He's also considered one of the nation's foremost experts when it comes to early voting. And Professor, let me just first start there with what Kavanaugh said, because it's both as illogical as I also think it's as dangerous in that how can you flip a result if you haven't counted all the votes, first of all? It also totally omits the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and if people follow the rules, postmark their actual ballots and send them, and in a compromised post office it doesn't get delivered till the day after the election, let's say, they have done their part. It's up to the states to count the votes. I listened to my Supreme Court justice. He's saying, again, don't let the law get in the way of what I'd like to see, which is the optics of an election night declared on Tuesday night. And that's a Supreme Court justice saying that.
Wow, Richard, you sound outraged. And I think many are. That's right. I mean, this is a newly appointed justice or recently appointed justice. It's, concerning, to put it mildly, that a Supreme Court justice is saying false things about the election. I mean, there's no other way to put it. The election results are not finalized on election night. We all know that. The results are announced as the ballots are counted. Some ballots take longer to count than others. And, if a voter has gone through every step necessary, has put that ballot in the mail, the ballot has been postmarked, I don't understand how there's some sort of problem with the democratic system, and it leads to illegitimacy if those ballots are counted as they come in. I don't understand all. And frankly, it's odd for a conservative justice, someone who is going to defer to state rules and state authority to make claims about what state officials want. I find this very hard to understand.
I was reading some of your work on this subject, and what I'd like is, this is not me throwing on a tinfoil hat being concerned about something that's in the hypothetical. Let's just go by what the president has said, not even in this cycle, but let's just go to the midterms. And this is what he said in the all-important state of Florida. And again, this is in November. He said, of 18. The Florida election should be called in favor of Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis, and that large numbers of new ballots showed up out of nowhere, and many ballots are missing or forged. An honest vote count is no longer possible. Ballots massively infected must go with election night. I bring that up because First of all, it's wrong, and we did at the beginning of the program, I can give countless examples where every election cycle, we don't know on election night the results, even before COVID was in our lexicon. But secondly, if he tries that again tonight, it brings up this term we've learned called red mirage, which if, and we believe it to be the case, the majority of people that are filing absentee ballots tend to skew Democrat, we could be counting ballots on election night, but by the time you count all the numbers, even days after, you're going to have a different result. If the president comes out on Tuesday night at 11 o'clock and says, game over, I win, it very well may not be reflective of reality.
Absolutely. The patterns are not going to be consistently Democrat or Republican in different states. It really depends on the ordering by which those ballots are received and the ability of states to count them. So in Pennsylvania, frankly, the early results in Pennsylvania that we're going to be hearing on election night, those are going to skew toward Republican, toward President Trump, because in Pennsylvania, the law is such that the election officials are not allowed to even begin to process those ballots until Election Day, the absentee ballots, that is. So those are going to be delayed. In Florida, on the other hand, they've been counting those early and absentee ballots as they've been coming in. Where the world will end or will be in a nightmare scenario, Richard, is going to be if we have the president or other leading political actors claiming victory, getting their supporters riled up. We don't want to be fanning these kinds of flames. We want to calm down, take a few days, it'll be okay, and give election officials the time and space.
To that end, it's funny, I've spoken to Republicans who privately have said, President screwed up here by putting so much doubt in terms of mail-in voting. He's driven a lot of people, and by the way, I bring a personal resentment to this for having loved ones who felt that they couldn't mail in their ballot, and they put themselves at risk here, and people who, by the way, are susceptible with, being of the high-risk population. They showed up and they stood online to make sure that they voted in person. We could be at north of 100 million votes here conceivably before Election Day for people who did just that. To that end, he's created a problem the president had for himself, because it's going to be harder to say stop the election now because so many Democrats will have voted. And in some places it's 2-1 in terms of some of the early returns that have come in, at least by registration. Inadvertently, he made a major strategic error.
Yeah, this is shocking. We had, I think you shared with me some of your personal stories a few weeks ago, Richard. I shared with you some emails that I received from a couple in New York in their 80s that had traditionally voted absentee and contacted me. In Florida, where older Republican-leaning voters have traditionally cast those absentee ballots, we're seeing those voters wait. We talked about this a few weeks ago, Richard. The worry was a spike in COVID. We're now seeing that. And in many of these states, are we going to have older voters lining up, waiting to vote on Election Day, long lines? This is what we were hoping to avoid. Listen, it's a worldwide pandemic. A bit of adjustment for a pandemic is okay, I think, but we're just not seeing this out of the White House. But we've got to deal with reality. We've got to get voters to the polls. We've got to count those ballots in a fair, legitimate way.
I don't want to not ring the alarm, but would it be fair to say that you're more comfortable where we are right now than you were a few weeks ago when we last spoke because of the massive turnout and in-person turnout in many cases, let alone people mailing in those ballots as early as they are? I know there's still a window here for malfeasance, but are you more comfortable now than when we spoke, in September?
I am. I mean, I said in September, the nightmare scenario was an election where we don't have finalized results, where there's too many ballots that are uncounted. We're going to have a result soon enough, and we won't have that kind of problems. Now, of course, it's going to depend on the margin in key states, in Florida, in North Carolina, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania. But millions, tens of millions of Americans have responded to calls by election officials to cast those ballots early, and they've been responding. That means election officials are going to be ahead of the game. And that also means on Election Day, there's going to be less likelihood of long lines of individuals being unable to cast their ballots, being afraid because of the inability to socially distance.
Professor Gronke, as always, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we will take a closer look at the all-important state of Florida and whether or not it will decide the race or instead add to the confusion that we could see on election night. Dexter Filkins from the New Yorker, he just wrote a compelling piece about just that. He'll join us next to discuss.